Again, was started by a European named Marriott. And when we come out, we're going to go over there to show you all the Europeans that started, as I refer to it as, and as it is, white supremacy, Egyptology. They are the ones who pretty much tried to erase Egypt out of Africa, even going back to a European named Hegel, Frederick George Hegel, in the 1700s, that said Egypt was not a part of Africa. You may have told some family and friends that you were going to Africa, and they asked you, where are you going in Africa? And you said Egypt. And most of the time the response is, Egypt is not in Africa.
My mama said that.
Well, that's through academic racism of Hegel that started that in the 1700s to take Egypt out of Africa, make it an entity of itself and have no connection to Africa, where everything about Egypt is connected with thousands of years of Africans' empirical observation of Mutnetchit and that migration down the Nile. All people who become a people or a nation migrate along riverbanks. So you can't come to the Nile in Egypt and say this is where the civilization started when you got now 2,000 miles still down the river. So what was going on 2,000 miles down the river? People were just wandering around? No, they were carrying this and thousands of years had developed this. But it's through that academic racism that they wanted to make Egypt an entity of itself. Prior to that, Europeans were stealing everything out of here. So Marriott got a big statue over there. And he says it's a shame how they're stealing and taking everything out of Egypt and housing it in European museums. He himself been a thief himself. But again, imagine, that would be like a thief robbing your house and all of a sudden they get real sad and say, you know what, we just stole so much stuff out this house. You know, why don't we try to leave at least a little bit left over? Well, that was the case with Marriott when he came here and said we need to try to leave a little bit. The one person who was responsible for this at that time, who was ruling Egypt, was Muhammad Ali. Not the boxer, but a Macedonian Turk. He was giving away a lot of the treasures to anyone who wanted the price, who had the price to buy it. Meso, as you see right here, is coming down here to Alexander. Look at Alexander up here. See that? Alexandra, then Cleopatra. Now most of us, when we think of Egypt, we think of Cleopatra. Alexander's death, his generals took over, and that becomes the Ptolemies. Now when a conquering army comes in, they do not bring their wives with them. All right, so what do? They rape the women when a conqueror comes in. So Cleopatra's background, yes, was part of the black Kemetic African origin, but her main line is coming through who? The Ptolemies, okay? But she is not the last ruler. The last ruler would be Nectanebo, who would be the indigenous ruler of ancient Kemet. But the point that I want to point out here is that you got the European Alexander up there who conquered Egypt around 332 BCE or before the Christian era. They're coming in, but yet Kush, being the mother of Kemet, Ta-Nehisi, when we get way down into Nubia, where even Keyseal and Bruce Williams have documented of Tasseti going back 25,000 years, and I'm going to show you a plate in the Nubian Museum that documents a time period of 55,000 to 65,000 years ago. But National Geographic is not going to show you that, even though National Geographic said every time we kick over a rock in Africa, we have to rewrite the textbooks. So they need to rewrite the textbooks on that as well. But the crisis and the travesty is the fact that Kush is not even up here. The mother of Egypt, where Egypt starts from, deep in the south. This is the black origin that Europeans and the History Channel always talk about, the black pharaohs, as though Kush was the only black pharaohs. We are many shades of black here, is that right? But we're still black, even though we are many shades of black. So Europeans have come in here trying to separate the people and then say who is Egyptian, who is not, and so forth. Like I said, you can go to Asia and see the variations of Asians and shades of color of Asians and so forth, but they're still what? Asians. You can go to Europeans and see the Swedes are very, very white, all right, but the Italians and the Sicilians can be a darker hue of white with dark hair, but they're still what? Europeans. All right, so it's only on the African continent that they have tried to divide and separate the people to take over Africa through academic racism of this white supremacy, Egyptology. And the worst part of it is not having Kush, Nubia, up here, especially the 25th dynasty, when they came in with Cashapp. Cashapp, who came in because when the invasions were coming in, like the Persians and like the Assyrians, who did Egypt depend on? All right? When England is in trouble, who does England depend on? Its mother, and okay, not its mother, but its daughter. And who is England's daughter? America. That's who they depend on to help it. So equally, Egypt was dependent on its mother, and its mother was Kush, when they were being invaded by the Persians and the Assyrians. So they turned to Kush, and they came in like Pianki, and conquered and defeated many of the enemies that came in, like the Persians, the Assyrians, all the way to the Delta. So why aren't they up here? This is white supremacy Egyptology, that the Europeans were establishing this and separating Egypt from Africa. The Nile doesn't start in Europe. The Nile doesn't start in Asia. The Nile starts right here on the African continent. They said where we came from. On the Papyrus of Nefer, Dr. Ben's favorite quote, we came from the beginning of the Nile where God happily dwelt at the foothill of the mountain of the moon. First capital of the Nefer, that the Greeks called Memphis, that even Memphis, Tennessee is named after, with the pyramids right on the banks of the Mississippi trying to duplicate this. But that first capital dedicated to the spiritual center, dedicated to Ptah, called Het Ka Ptah, or the house of the spirit of Ptah. At this time, the spiritual deity or God that was worshipped at this time was Ptah. That these great pieces right here that you see of Ptah is taken from the city of Menefer and also from the temple of Ptah. He is holding the scepter, showing that he's the supreme power of the universe in a shroud. Now here we see that this is called coming out of what is known as the Memphite theology. The Memphite theology is the creation story of Menefer. Now it's very important to know that in the creation story at this time, this is the first time we see a spiritual God saying, let there be light, and creating the universe. Those of you who are familiar with Dr. George G.M. James' book, The Stolen Legacy, who did great research, peace be upon him, on the Memphite theology and the creation at this time. When we look at the creation of the Zep-Tepi, that's the Kemetic word that means the beginning, long before there was a Genesis, long before there was a God called Yahweh, Jehovah, Elohim. Here we see Ptah creating the universe. This lays the foundation of what we see in the Western belief system of Judaism, copying from the Memphite theology story to make this Hebrew religion based off of the creation of Ptah. Ptah is generally got a shroud. His cap is always blue sometimes because he did what? He's the architect of the universe. He's the one that says, let there be light. He's anthropomorphized in a human form for us to understand it. Like Shu is anthropomorphized in a human form. Shu is air. Put your hand up to your mouth. Say, Shu. What did you feel? Air. So for us to understand Shu, what did they do? Put it in a human form for us to understand it. Geb was the earth. They put it in a human form. So the deity God, Ptah, is in a human form for us to understand Ptah. Generally always shown as jet black. Jet black. Now after this time period of pre-dynastic and also the archaic period coming down to the Middle Kingdom, now the deity is Amen. Still monotheism of one God, depending on what period it is. Ptah is also standing on Ma'at. Truth, justice, and righteousness. Okay?
The creator God, and who was the god of Menefer, and who was the chief member in the triad of Menefer. His wife was Sekhmet and son was Nefertari. As he told you last night in the lecture, that Ptah was a patron of art and artisans, and that is why the Oscar trophy was inspired from the shape and the style of Ptah. Okay? And we have also been talking last night about the Ptah people. Yeah, you remember this? The Ptah people. Ango.
The 12 people, man.
We saw a comparison between the 12 people of Kemet and those of Congo. This is where the African culture, African life, African race is to be found. And those people were highly respected, highly dignified, and they held, many of them held very important jobs in the court of kings. So you could see a picture of this. Take, if you have a photo permit, take your picture of here. For baptized as Akhenaten, and his wife Nefertiti had 2 palaces, 200 miles south of Cairo, and I'm gonna show you now the floor of the palace. The floor of the palace, which dates from 1350 BC. Okay? We know that